Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. I am so excited that you're here today because I am sharing a conversation with my dear friend and colleague, Suprasensory Shahir. So Shahir is a self-professed love devotee. Shahir is a queer Muslim mystic, an astrologer, a tarot reader, and a spirit bridger, which is a term we talk about. I asked Shahir to kind of speak more about this idea of being a spirit bridger. Our conversation is really revolving around the idea of Shahir's path. You know, how Shahir got to this point, how Shahir's relationship with spirit and their spirituality and their spiritual path inform their offerings and their readings. And we spend a great deal of time talking about Jupiter and Aries, which is the transit we're currently living through. So Jupiter entered Aries on December 20th, 2022. And kind of in direct motion, right? Jupiter has been in Aries in recent recorded past, which was in the middle of 2022. May, June-ish, Jupiter was in Aries, but Jupiter never really progressed further than 8-degree Aries before turning retrograde back into Pisces, right? And so this shift from Jupiter having been in its home sign, Pisces, at least traditional home sign, into Jupiter and Aries is quite a shift, right? And so we spoke about the symbology of Jupiter, of Aries, how Jupiter and Aries may come up for ourselves individually, relationally, and collectively. And we also spoke a little bit about Shahir's experiences so far with this transit. Shahir and I are both Gemini Moon, so you can definitely feel that in this conversation. We laughed a lot. It was so brilliant. I just love sharing space with Shahir, and I feel like their wisdom is so potent and so felt. So yeah, I'm super excited to be sharing this episode with you. So let me introduce you to Shahir by way of their bio. Shahir is a love devotee, a queer Muslim brown mystic who believes in love in everything. Shahir shows up as an astrologer, tarot reader, and spirit guide connector by tapping into their claircognizant and clairsentience gifts. All right, here's my conversation with Shahir. Welcome to the podcast, Shahir. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I've been so excited. You've been on my guest list for a while now. And so I was kind of waiting for like when it feels right. So when you asked me to be on your to be part of your Venus project, I was like, okay, this is the time. And then I discovered later that you are a manifester in your body graph, human design. So I was like, oh, makes so much sense. Of course. Now that Shahir has like punctured the invitation bubble, here we are.
Here we are, and I am so glad to be here. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, me too. We met at Sabrina Monarch's course. I think that was that in late 2020?
That was second half of 2020.
Second half of 2020. Yeah, and I remember just like through our conversations and like class delineations, just feeling so much resonance and affinity with you. And I'm from Indonesia originally, you're from Malaysia, so I know we had that region thing going on, but also I was like, I just love how you word things. I love how you see the world. And I always really appreciate how authentically you show up in all of the spaces that you're in. And I feel like it's so infectious. It's so Aries. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, honestly, I just follow, the instinct kind of thing, right? It's just like, yeah, that's just who I am. And like, it's just a way of being.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember when I first met you, even though I didn't know that whether what's your origin or whatever, I was like, no, I think I'm gonna click with Jonathan. Like I knew that like almost like a instant moment, Even though it was like a Zoom class at that time, right? Obviously.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also we both discovered we have Gemini moons too, so that always helps.
The synastry.
Yeah, exactly. So I like to begin all of my conversations by asking all of my guests to kind of introduce themselves in the present moment. And usually the way I word that question is, who do you feel, sense, or know yourself to be in this present moment?
Oh my God, I love that. For me, in this current moment, I feel like I am a lover of life, right? I always call my like people like lovers. I've been using that as a way of like language, even more. I've been kind of just like really identifying with my kind of just like even my faith more, even so I think recently as like a queer Muslim kind of like mystic. I've been listening to like different like supplications, du'as in the morning, and just like and I see it as a correlation in my astrology as well. And my view of the cosmos relationship. So yeah, I've been feeling that deeply recently. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I feel within myself this like burst of joy every time you call your listeners or, people who follow your work lovers. Because I really feel that. I think there's a sincere call, and it's kind of a reminder that like, yeah, we're all in this romantic affair with life,
Yes, that's so true.
Yeah. Why would you say that word means so much to you?
For me, has always been like love is, definitely something sacred, and I've seen it's like almost real power of it to overcome things, or as a way of like healings, obviously, and kind of just like going inwards. And how can it also be very easy, and I think part of the reason why I wanted to say like lover is also because just like a reminder that someone is like loving you, right? It's like that process of like acknowledging that so you are a lover, so you are someone with love, also who loves as well, so there's a lot of like a play on words on that, I feel too. So lover can mean anything, so it's also very fluid. But yeah, I think those are where I'm at now.
Yeah I feel it in my heart, kind of like as a chill as you were saying that. Yeah I think it's so funny like how sometimes we live or we walk around the world not remembering that like we do have this access, to this really powerful force that's always within all of us, and we always have the choice to tap into that. So thank you for that reminder. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your story. Maybe start with your sun, moon, rising, and just in general, how you kind of come to this point that you find yourself in now. I know you are a diviner, you're an astrologer, tarot reader. I think you also, there was this word that you use, spirit bridger, and I was finding myself curious about that. I was like, oh, I would love to hear Shahir talk more about this. Yeah. And also love devotee, which is, so beautiful. So I mean, I'm aware you are Gemini Moon, Mercury in Pisces, and you kind of encompass this, largeness. And I
Yeah.
think that's incredible. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about your story.
I call myself a child of Jupiter as well, obviously.
Mhm.
Being a Sagittarius rising, I remember the first time I knew that I was Sag rising and Gemini Moon, and everything just like clicks in my life. It's
Mm.
just like, yes, that's me. Like I learned about Jupiter, like chart ruler, etc. So it feels very big in terms of that, in terms of my how I discover astrology. And I think I love how my discovery of astrology also like aligns with my like almost spiritual awakening. It just all happens together. It's almost
Mhm.
it's like a this complete shift in terms of identity almost. I want to expand this worldview of mine to what is seems clicking and what seems like, oh my god, this is it, right? It's like it was eye-opening to just like learn and just like um I think it was so funny. I think I was into astrology as more like a fun way, and then I first started
Mhm.
with tarot. So I was like
Mm.
a more serious tarot reader before I was an astrologer, but then I was like
Ah.
really learning on the side, and then yeah, and then now I'm just like practicing those mainly, and I have sessions where I like to use both
Mhm.
actually equally as a system, because there are things that astrology does that tarot. I think there are things that tarot does it better in
Mhm.
terms of certain questions, or maybe because I don't I see them as a more complementary tool in my journey as well. I was interacting with a lot of like, I learned a lot of like spirit guides, angels, ancestors, god decks, all this psychic access of magic or psychic access of like with divinity.
Mm.
And then from there, I call myself a spirit bridger because it actually came from my tarot session.
Mm.
Because when I was doing tarot reading, I was getting this like real stuff of like, all this like spirit stuff coming
Mhm.
through. And then from
Mhm.
there, I learned that I was like, oh, hey, I have certain talents here. I need to like make space for it in a different session. And that's how I was intentionally becoming like a spirit bridger, because I'm clairsentient and clairvoyant, um, and also claircognizance in a way. So I could easily interact with spirits in general,
Mm. Mhm.
their presence, etc. And so that's how that kind of like came about in terms of like the whole identity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about this relationship with spirit that you have. Do you feel like
Mhm.
it's something that has been present in your life, like throughout all of your, childhood and um, teenage years, like prior to you really
Mm.
discovering and playing with the systems and the tools? Did you
Mhm.
always kind of have this personal relationship with spirit?
Yeah, I mean, I was always curious. I mean, I've always believed in angels in a way, because as a Muslim, I grew up I was such a pious child. As also, I was always into religious stuff. I was actually very good at Arabic when I was a child. I'm
Oh.
so sad that I can't, like, I'm not fluent in it anymore.
Mm.
I almost went on a route to become like a Islamic school, sort of like an ustaz or something like that, like a scholar,
Wow.
or
Okay.
like learning the Quran. So I
Yeah.
almost went on that path. And so that was kind of like very sad, like Jupiter sort of story. And then, however, I was always kind of believing in angels, and I've always, I also knew through my ancestors more maternal lines that are kind of just like there exists like guardians protecting us in a way. So like there's always like
Mm.
spirit guardians. So
Mhm.
that has always been there. However, it's not like, sometimes it can also be taboo to talk about it. Although whenever there's like crisis, we would talk about it. So it has always been there in the upbringing, but
Yeah.
then it was more nuanced, or it almost like either being shunned away, or it depends on who you ask, right? Of the party.
Mhm.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that brought me to something that a friend of mine, Zanetta Sykes, said once about divination. And
Mm-hmm.
their idea around divination is that divination is not just spirit talking to us, right? But spirit, you know, creating this pathway of connection and communication with us when there's a need that arises from our end, right?
Yeah.
Where like we open up to saying like, I can't do this alone. Please help me, Spirit.
Oh my God. No, I love that. Yeah. And I feel that way as well. It's like, maybe it's also such a very like primal thing, but like for me, it's like, that's why I always love to call my sessions like portals, because that's what I do. It's like, for me, it's like every intention is so sacred that like, it's like if you have that intention, like the pathway will open up for you. Spirits are always around. Like sometimes when people ask me questions like that, I kind of just want to laugh, because what do they mean? It's like they'll be asking me, like, I feel it's like I feel evil saying this, right? But like, like imagine, like, oh my God, they're like, they'll be asking you very like, oh, do I have spirits guides around me? And I'm just like in my head, I'm just like, yeah, of course. Like, what do you mean?
It's like, how could you not?
I know. But however, it's like, it's also like the kind of like the sanctity of like, okay, but do you actually have the like the pure intention or whatever? Not like, I think it's basically just like the intention to actually connect with it, right? And like, because for me, once you're wanting to connect with it, that's also like how divination is also, right? You have like you set an intention, and then you just like, I am open to be in a receptive mode or whatever. And so you create that channel or that portal, or that pathway, whatever. Yeah.
Do you feel like the practitioner's role then, it's so fascinating, this whole conversation to me, Shahir, because I'm like, I also see myself in a different vocabulary and different cosmology maybe, but I really see a very similar thread around like how I see myself as a practitioner too in what you just described. So I guess I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you feel the practitioner's role is in kind of mediating that relationship, right? Between the person, the querent, right, or the client, and maybe like if you use tarot cards or the birth chart with that modality, as well as like their spirit guides and your spirit guides too. Where do you see the practitioner in that web of relationship?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I see it as like it's like a messenger, both like a messenger, but also, not just like a blunt messenger that you just like give everything, right? It's like, for example, if there is like a message and then I'm being asked to deliver that message, and I'll say that. However, I will also somehow like, I feel like I'm also like psychically interacting, almost like I'm doing a psychic dialogue.
Yeah.
At the same time as you're delivering the message. So it's like, that's also part of my own, I would say, boundaries. But I think it's not just boundaries. I think it's also about like asking the spirit guides and kind of just like, all right, what would be like a very nice and refined and like constructive sort of like storytelling to this, right? And I've also felt sometimes in a way that just like, yeah, you're creating this bridge and you just get an answer. And then sometimes it is about just saying it to that person's face and kind of just like, if it's very loud or something. But then I think it's also part of my role to kind of just like also contextualize things in a way as well, is that especially if it's like a storytelling of something regarded like something quite difficult. I think during those moments of like where we cannot just like, say shit. So obviously we're not, but like there is a kind of just like attack or a ways of like, hey, okay, this story is just coming out. How do we feel about it? And like I feel one thing is very important, at least as a practitioner, I think in any field, for instance, especially in the realm of like more spiritual stuff, I do feel like you have to be very authentic, and we also have to kind of what's the word for it? Know what's our like own boundaries, and like not like trauma them upon like the client or whatever, doing those sort of like things. Because I do feel it is definitely about like being true to the messages, yet at the same time, we are also being ethical practitioner. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I think that's such a beautiful, nuanced answer. Something I'm really hearing from you is that perhaps the practitioner needs to cultivate over time and with experience this discernment around whether, how much do we need to translate and how we need to translate for this person's greatest good, because, you're right. Sometimes you get messages that are spicy.
Yeah, they are spicy and uncomfortable. But yeah, and I think sometimes you do need that spiciness in a session, right?
Totally.
And that would be nice. Yeah, but then especially for like, I think it's like, it's depending on the client of like what is the state of the client, right? Yeah.
Love that. I would love to hear a little bit more about faith and spirituality through the lens of Shahir, especially as someone who identifies as a queer Muslim mystic.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. I think it was only when I was confronting with my queerness that I was definitely confronting with my spirituality and like religious sort of like holding. And then there was actually a moment in my life where I was like, oh my God, like I have to choose either or, right? I think a lot of like Abrahamic sort of religion or even I think mostly Abrahamic religion, especially so. There are also always these few verses that you are using against the homosexual and using against people who are different. However, when I was older and then I got to know that I was like, oh my God, all of this are like some patriarchal sort of like heterosexual sort of like bullshit and agenda in a way. Because, there are many ways of interpreting the Quran, and especially now more so, that's like, there are a lot of rereadings, like more of like advanced scholars have been really interrogating all the stories, whether the like Islam itself is, quote unquote that, that kind of just way. Is it queerphobic? No, actually there have always been systems and societies, Islamic societies, which those things coexist and those things are fine, which is kind of interesting how we parallel it to astrology as well, because recently like a lot of the medieval Islamic sort of like sources like Dr. Ali Ulumi's work, a lot of it are talking more nuances about how certain planets actually represent certain sexualities, right? So I think there's a lot of parallel there too, I think you can see. In terms of like a scholarships way. But yeah, I think it is, for me, it's just I subscribe more to the Sufis sort of like Islam, although a lot of people also have a debate, what is a Sufi, what is Sufism in a way, whether it's actually Islamic, etc. However, I'm very devoted to that sort of school. Basically for me, God is love. Hence, that's why I call myself a love devotee, because I am devoted to love, hence I am devoted to the divine Ra, Allah, or whatever, universe. Very Piscean in a way. It's just like everything just lumps up together, and so that's how it all kind of like come about. I do use some sort of like, in terms of my own, the reason why I call myself a mystic as well, just because I do believe in like correspondence and kind of just like incorporating sort of like the prayers, and then with some sort of like planetary sort of like rituals, or so like working the archetypes together. So that's also part of it.
I love that. I feel like also, this debate around traditions, right? Like what constitutes one tradition or another is always very present. And I think it's always very interesting intellectually, but when it comes to really, walking the path, it's totally a different thing, and like no two Sufist. Do we use that word? Like no two people who are devoted to like Sufi's teachings will walk the same the same path, and we'll have
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same understanding.
To each of their own, right? It's
Yeah.
like, which is kind of funny because at the end of the day, like I love my chart so much, right? It's like, so sometimes people see, like, for example, the Lord of the ninth house would represent your relationship, or like the ninth house itself would represent your relationship to God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have Aries, I have Leo ninth house, and it's ruled by an exalted sun, Aries in the fifth. For me, my relationship to God is very playful almost sometimes too. I seek enjoyment, and the reason why I feel like I can just like embrace life in quite easily, it's just because, like, for me, it's just like, I just like, I need that like state of being, of just like, like, that is like the awe and the wonder, is also part of like God's beauty. Hence it is also part of like, the truth itself, in a way, which is like,
Yeah.
for humans to actually experience God, quote unquote. It's like, that's also part of like the everyday life.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, definitely. I find myself, I resonate and relate to a lot of the things that you were sharing about your upbringing. I also remember when I was grade 10, getting like the best student certificate in like religion studies, and it's, now looking back at it, I'm like, this is so weird. But yeah, I do think there's something really profound there you were sharing about the everyday, and about how, divinity kind of shows up in both big ways, right? And like philosophical ways, but also in the everyday. And my Virgo rising feels very, very seen in that comment you made. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. It makes sense. I believe in that so much because, like, it's like you've met, like, you've had, like, for me, probably, I've had like so many, I would say, magical encounters, I would like to say, it's like, yeah, and how just like the signals and the codes are everywhere for you to kind of like figure it out,
Yeah, exactly. So one of the reasons why we decided to have this conversation, or the topic that we are wanting to explore, is Jupiter in Aries. And by the time this conversation is released, Jupiter is in Aries very solidly. And it's a relatively quick transit, right? I think by May or so in 2023, Jupiter is going to move into Taurus. But I'd love to kind of, create a transmission with you about Jupiter and Aries. So the first question that I kind of feel like we should probably explore is Jupiter itself, right? And I would love to hear your relationship with Jupiter. Who do you think Jupiter is? In what ways has Jupiter shown up for you? And in what ways do you see Jupiter in your everyday life?
For me, oh my god, my Jupiter. I love my Jupiter. I have my Jupiter talisman on my altar, which I manifested through my friends, and which is kind of amazing. Literally, I just put it on Twitter, and
Wow.
it became a fundraising, which is like such a Jupiterian thing to be gifted something, right? And so for me, Jupiter is in that way the gifts. It is a planet that is, I always view Jupiter as like the balance of Saturn. I always look at Jupiter and Saturn as just like, kind of just like brothers, kind of like, they are like, they're siblings in a way. They are in relationship with each other, of like part of like, Jupiter is like the sort of like expansion or sort of like liberation, and Saturn is the one that gives it walls and etc. If Saturn is something that shackles, and then like Jupiter is the one that unshackles it, right? And Jupiter is the bigger, call it the greater fortune, that's kind of just like the language. I always see it more as a it is more diurnal, right? So it is of the day sex. So meaning it is the good things in life that are perhaps more visible. Sort of like status or money, literally sometimes too, right? So that could also be Jupiter. I'm gonna just stop there first.
Yeah, I love that. I think, I've been also thinking about this idea of Jupiter being the greater benefic versus Venus. And one way I've kind of contextualized that is, in a lot of the mythology around Jupiter or Zeus, there's the thunder, right? Or like the lightning. And there is, I think, with Jupiterian things, there is that larger than life quality. And I even see this like sitting across from you as a Sag rising. There is like that kind of like, yes, we can do this in life kind of energy, which is so electrifying, because as someone whose chart is ruled by Mercury, I mean, usually I'm kind of just moving from one crack to another, That's kind of the way that Mercury works, right? But I think with Jupiter, it's like it arrives in like a thunder. It arrives in like with horses and carriage, and yeah, I also am kind of feeling into this contrast that you are delineating between Jupiter and Saturn. It's very interesting because I think, the way I'm contextualizing this is how the signs that are ruled by Jupiter, right, Pisces and Sagittarius, are in a square to one another, and then they kind of hold, the signs that are ruled by Saturn, right? And I think this pattern was first brought to my attention by Diana Rose Harper, where she was talking about how Jupiter is that which holds Saturn, right? If Saturn is like the delimiter, the one that holds the structure, who is hugging Saturn, And it's kind of like thinking about Jupiter as the hugger of Saturn is very...
Oh my God. I love that so much. Jupiter is the hugger of Saturn. And like, I always see that as a form of, also a form of relief, right? It's like, if someone's going through a Saturn perfection years, right? There will always be Jupiter at the end. It's like, I mean, Jupiter is at the beginning and then Jupiter is also at the end. So it's almost like, if Saturn is related to all this, like, suffering, depends on the conditions of the chart, whatever. But in general, it is more malefic, right? Its role, to be a witness of like the human suffering, the pain, the constrictions. I think there's something about like the Jupiter being the hugger, meaning like those signs are actually like, will either make you remember the good days so that you can push forward to kind of like witness it again, and then in Pisces, in a way, you're like, oh my God, you're feeling it. You're already like, there's already a sense of liberation there.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think in Sagittarius, there's a sense of like looking forward into something that is beyond us, right? Or like really, when I think about Jupiter and Sagittarius, I always think about like kind of stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, right? And what else is out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I think Sagittarian is always like the vision, right? What's the next vision? So I feel that way.
Yeah. So I'm curious, now that we're in Jupiter and Aries, when you look back on your Jupiter and Pisces experience, what was that like for you?
Oh my God, Jupiter in Pisces was a lot of dreaming almost. I do feel Jupiter in Pisces for me, I wouldn't say I got like the best transit in a way, to be honest. It was pretty kind of just like Pisces in the sense of like a lot of tears, a lot of grief, a lot of but also it's like, a lot of like in the waters, and like, sometimes I do feel I definitely felt the heaviness of like a water transit for me, to be honest, because my chart is not like as conducive for water, but it's not like I don't need it, right? But like I can feel the Jupiter in Pisces was just like me feeling that it was healing something from my past, a lot of it, which is also the good thing. It was transiting my fourth house. A lot of like in like I feel like a lot of hidden work. Because it's like sometimes the fourth house you can't really even speak of it because it's like, you know, it's not like it's taboo or whatever, but like, it's just really like, oh my god, like it is the subterranean. It's like the deepest part of the chart.
Yeah.
And for Jupiter to be healing that space, I think it was so good. It's very, I feel reawakened in a way. I feel like Jupiter in Pisces. It's almost like my soul was restored somehow.
Yeah, I think there was a conversation maybe a couple years ago that you had with Sabrina that I was recently listening back to, and you were recounting the story about having an angel come to you in your dreams and then kind of like giving you a soul healing, and that was kind of coming up for me as you were speaking.
Oh my
because
God.
it just kind of sounds like maybe Jupiter in Pisces. You know, it's fascinating because it's not just you. I do feel like a lot of people came into this transit with a lot of optimism and with a lot of, like, I would say kind of slightly overblown optimism, right? Like thinking, oh my God, it's going to solve all of our problems.
It's the Neptune effect.
Exactly. There's a lot of, you know, when you hear people delineating it in the beginning of 2022, there was a lot of like, I would say, you know, over optimism about what it can accomplish. But I really like what you were saying about the experience being more of that internal healing. And I will say that, you know, similarly for me, having, you know, Jupiter just kind of transiting over my 7th house, even though 7th house is a much more visible place than the 4th house, a lot of the work was very much kind of very subtle, I would say. It's more about recognizing the things that I took for granted and no longer engaging in that pattern of just being like taking my partner for granted and my partnerships for granted.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the fact that your podcast is also healing the spirit, right? It's
Totally. That's actually a great point, Shahir, because I originally, had the title Future Language when I was thinking about the podcast. And if you listen to some of the earlier episodes, I was asking my guests to talk about this idea of the future language. And that idea came to me sometime in 2021. So it was when Jupiter was in Aquarius. And then when Jupiter moved into Pisces and I was ready to release the podcast, I tuned in and I was like, this is no longer resonant. Like, this is no longer the title for the podcast. So yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, makes sense. And then for me, like, healing the spirit just like feels very Jupiter and Pisces in a way that's just like, Jupiter is the planet of good spirit. And it is all the good diamonds, or which is like kind of like the angels, whatever. And so healing the spirit is basically, and it is a planet of healing. So it just feels like what the image coming to my mind is just like almost like, you know, that's like a spiritual bath, you know.
I love that. So how are you kind of feeling the shift that we recently had from Jupiter in Pisces to Jupiter in Aries?
It is definitely I mean, this is not the first time we're here. We're already here before because we already had the Jupiter in Pisces, but this is actually the first time it will actually go past like 9 degrees or 8 degrees or something like that. So we actually have uncharted territory still for the Aries sort of zodiac landscape. For me, Jupiter in Aries, for me, it's almost like if Jupiter in Pisces, parts of us were kind of like dreaming the world, right? Perhaps even going internal. I think Jupiter in Aries is where you have to kind of like believe in that dream and not get stuck there in our dream world. And the reason why, because it's literally, this is almost like a prophecy. I was like watching Slumberland or something. Is that on Netflix? So basically this is the story. So there was someone who was just like went into the dream world, and then they found someone else who were stuck in it. And I felt like that felt like a very Jupiter in Pisces / Aries transition, where you can't just stay in those like state of like, yeah, now we've seen the ideal in a way, in the kind of just like what it could be. Now let's live it out, right? I think that's like part of the Jupiter in Aries. If you really believe in that dream, how are you able to use your willpower? It's not like maybe the Jupiter in Taurus will solidify part. I mean, it's more earthy. But I do feel there's something about Jupiter in Aries is about like using your will to find a way. Yeah.
It makes me think about the words creative solution, actually, like this idea of coming up with like a spark of creative solution.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah. I also was, really feeling, well, it's interesting because my experience with it, your experience with it was Jupiter ingress into your 5th house, right? Of pleasure, of creativity. And I'm definitely curious to hear how that's going so far. But mine was from the 7th house to the 8th house. And the experience of Jupiter entering Aries in the 8th house for me was actually, it started off with me being sick, like in my body. I literally got sick. Yeah, and I literally caught a really bad cold during kind of the week of Christmas. And yeah, it was very interesting because it was very uncomfortable for me. And yet I really see that, it is about this moment now looking back, now that I'm completely healed. It was this moment of giving myself the space to almost like the image that's coming to my mind is like this rope. I've been wearing kind of this layer of like, like this trance-like dream, and then I think that the experience of being sick kind of provided me with a moment to reflect on my relationship with my body, and then to start seeing how like maybe I'm called into a different way of being, actually. And it wasn't that I was sick because I was doing anything wrong necessarily, but it just kind of changed my relationship to my body in some sense.
Yeah.
What is your relationship with Aries? I'm curious to hear. As an Aries sun, I feel like you probably have a lot of stories and a lot of kind of juicy anecdotes about being
oh my god
about Aries energy.
Think about when I think about Aries energy, I feel it's actually about like really about quickness, and it's almost like a gambling almost, right? It's I mean, I'm an Aries sun and Venus. I know sometimes I feel like I am annoying. I think it's also my own Jupiter judging me, or I don't know. It's like there's a relationship in my chart that I feel like I think it's always the opposite, right? So I have a Libra Jupiter. Really, like I do feel like I live in that Aries Libra sort of like incarnation story. Axis. Because I have a Libra Jupiter opposing my Aries and Venus. I do feel Aries is kind of just like the quick decision maker for sure. Do first, think later. Can feel very Aries, as it's not like you don't think about it. I think it is really about trusting that first impulse. I have a very recent story actually to tell. It's kind of wild, but I felt like I've lived out the Aries Jupiter transit.
Yeah.
So I was it's the new year. Actually was trying to find a spot. I'm trying to move out end of the month. I'm trying to move to another place. And so last week I reached out to a few places. I think I reached out about 6 places. I think only 3 of them replied, and one of them said they don't have. It's not available, so there's only 2 potentials. And then on Wednesday, I went out to meet my other friend, and I was just talking to him casually, and then he was like, "Oh, you're actually finding a room? How much do you need? How much do you want it for? There's actually a place like my place, my landlady, is actually opening up a room.
Whoa.
And I was like, I need to check that out. And so I already had like tree house kind of just like planned this past weekend. And so I was supposed to go to the Friday one, but that Friday person kind of like rescheduled me. And then I went to check out my friend's place on Saturday. And then, but the other two places I've seen photos of it, so I kind of just like have an idea of what's there and what's not there. So I went to this friend's place of mine, like it's like a dear friend. And then the owner was just so nice. And then like, actually there was someone else who was interested before me. And then the lady basically said that like, if you say yes today, and then I was like, I'll say yes right now.
That's amazing.
And that's how I secured my housing. And obviously, I there was a lot of factors that made me say yes to it. But like, ultimately, it was just about my impulse of just like, you know what, like, let's just not waste time. I feel I've met, like, it's also just a temporary release. It's not like a 1 year long, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I was doing such an Aries thing. I was just like, there is a problem and I just want to solve it. Yeah. And you actually solve it in the most efficient way.
Yeah. Wow. I love that story, Shahir. This is making me think of how, Aries is like cardinal fire, right? So it is about, to kind of bring again this idea of Jupiter and Aries, right? Jupiter being correlated with faith and Aries being correlated with action. It's making me think of this phrase, faith in action. How can you cultivate so much self-trust within yourself that you can go ahead and charge ahead and just kind of lean into an action space, right? And even to have this trust that, if you have to troubleshoot later, that's cool too. That's not actually a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like it is a very like primordial sort of force, right? It just feels like it's like your body feels just like, I need to just say yes to this because, it's like, it's kind of like the idea of like, opportunity knocks once kind of like an idea too, where it's like, hence I feel like I actually, people always think just like Aries is like cardinal as in like it's initiating the life, but it's also in a way it's actually, there is some sort of like something that they are actually reacting to, there is a sense of like, I'm actually reacting to life in its most in its most raw form. I feel I think that is what Aries is actually reacting to. Yeah.
When I think about my Aries too, right? Because Aries falls in my 8th house, there is a sense of like, my Aries tends to come out when I'm in that space of sharing things with people. Like sometimes I feel my Aries coming out in sessions or like in my relationship with someone who I perceive to be stuck in this like grid, right? Of like this matrix of like, no, I can't do this. And then I'm like, no, actually you can. And it's like, I feel like that's the other thing about Aries. Like, when Aries is in the room, right? Because like in the northern hemisphere, we think about Aries as starting spring, and I think there is that kind of jump-starty energy to Aries. Yeah,
yeah. No, there is a reason why the ancients has always believed Aries is the first sign, even if you do mundane astrology, to kind of like see the horoscope of the year. You always use the sun ingress into Aries, sort of equilibrium to see what's going to be the year ahead.
Yeah.
For a country, etc. So yeah, it is like the first signs of the zodiac.
Yeah. How do you see Jupiter and Aries as a transit? How do you see it showing up, kind of on a personal level, or relational level, or collective level?
I think it's just like, oh, everything is just intertwined for me.
I know.
I do feel like there is a sense of it's really having like that faith in oneself. It's very Aries in a way. I think it's like I mean, Aries is the exaltation of the sun. So the sun is elevated there. And so the sun is the sense of like self and the sense of like the fulfilling of the destiny of the self almost. And with Jupiter there, I do feel it is for everyone at least. There is a sense of like a greater faith in oneself or in how you want to achieve that personal goal, right? You know, personal hence, but it's also very universal in a way because it's like for me, Jupiter has always the agenda of something more than just the personal, right? And so I've been tapping into the energy of like the ripple effect or like even like the fire that's just like the small fire that you're tending to right now. It can lead to like bigger fires, right? And not like in a harmful way. I think it is more of like that small desires that you are actually fanning. And actually teaching yourself something about like, you know, how that small thing can become bigger. And you never know what is like the ripple effect or you know, the kind of just like follow-up growth of it, of that potential. And so yeah, there is a sense of like a rawness in potential. Are you willing to grow it? Are you actually willing to teach yourself the ways of growing it, right? So yeah, I'm almost giving myself a self-advice here because I'm also like, you know, I'm gonna start a podcast this year, and so it's like I've been trying to accelerate my YouTube presence even more. So it's like I do feel there is a sense of like, yeah, am I willing to let myself be the teacher of this experience? Yeah.
Wow.
It is, yeah. And allowing like the, you know, Aries is also like the sign of like the young prince. So there's always a sense of the youthfulness within. And so, you know, obviously we always talk about like the inner child sort of like work or whatever. But I also feel like with the Jupiter in Aries, it's almost like, you know, like allowing your like the inner youth within you is actually to the inner fool within you to actually be the teacher. Like it's like a very, because, you know, Jupiter for me is like it has finished one round over like all those realms, right? All like has finished one round all the way until Pisces. And how can we carry that like the similar Jovian wisdom of the past to really kind of just like choosing our fires too. Like we can't contain everything. And I think that's why Jupiter in Pisces can feel a bit internal or a bit passive in a way, because I do feel like in Aries there is always the storytelling of the really like the individuation almost, right? It's like the separation. The first decan of Aries, for example, is the Mars decan. In all systems, in both systems, if you follow the triplicity or if you follow like the Chaldean, it is the Mars. So it is a separation from, you know, from the mother or whatever, but like it is a sense of separation from the bigger thing. Hence, how are you tending to something that is actually for you, that actually, you know, that actually fires you up. You know, you can't take everyone else's dream. For it, you can't bear it all. Which is also something, which is also an Aries learning, but like, yeah, that's also part of it.
Something that's kind of coming to me as you were speaking and that I'm like kind of synthesizing here is this idea of the vulnerability, right, of tapping into the rawness of that potential. You know, it's kind of giving me this, I don't know, this is a very specific scene that right now is kind of playing in my head.
Tell us.
In my Mercury and Pisces way. But it's almost kind of giving me this vibe of like, you know, the teacher who really believes in their students and almost maybe gave the assignment like a little too fast. You know how, like, some of my favorite teachers I've had in my life have been people who seems to see something in me and like gave me an assignment that was a little too big for me. You know, like a little too difficult that I had to really step up, right? And as you were speaking, I was kind of feeling like, yeah, there is this idea of like separating from where we've been or where we've come from and giving ourselves the permission to kind of be in that exploratory space and to try, right?
Yeah.
I am a 3-5 profile in human design. And so I feel like this, even though I don't have a lot of Aries energy in my life, I've had, you know, if you know 3-5, it's a very Aries energy. It's very much like, okay, plug and chug and we're going to fuck it up and oh well. That's cool.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I'm 5'1", so yeah.
You're 5'1".
So we have both fives.
Nice. Yeah. How is that experience for you? I feel like line fives are very Jupiterian, don't you think, in some ways?
I think so in some ways. I can also be very Saturnian, I feel, or depends. I don't know too much about it, but I know I'm 5'1" for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the 5'1s I know in my life are extremely avid learners and also just kind of like shows up in a way that like always makes splashes in the collective, you know? And I definitely see that in you.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Yeah, no, that's fair. That's a fair assessment.
Yeah. Do you feel like this transit, you know, if you think about maybe yourself or your clients or the people who work, you know, with you, what do you think is sort of what is your highest hope for this transit for people?
Oh my God. I feel like I've been kind of just like the Jupiter in Aries person for people too. I think it is about like, you know, trusting your inner cheerleader as well. I feel like Aries energy can sometimes, you know, are good with like cheerleading others in a way. I was just like being such an advocate for something. But then the Jupiter in Aries, I do feel like it's like, how do we advocate for ourselves? And I feel like there's something there with like Jupiter in Aries answering to Mars in Gemini, which is just going to be direct, right? So we're actually just going to have Mars in Gemini and Mars in Cancer for our Jupiter in Aries.
Totally.
If I'm not mistaken, because like by then Mars will go into Leo. I think by the time we'll probably have Jupiter in Taurus. I'm not too sure, but yeah. Anyways, I do feel there is a sense of like the self-advocacy part of it that's going to be super important. And it's also like another point I wanted to feel into was like it's like, yeah, like trusting the inner sort of like brilliance in that way, because I do feel like Aries is that sign that is about like the inner knowing of like the primordial sort of like knowing in a way. And I feel like and choose like and just choose it, right? It's like, and knowing there's a reward, like you know, it's like I do feel like Jupiter in Aries is almost like, you know, the classic, I think someone already said this, I'm not sure which platform, was just like the idea of like fortune favors the bold, right? And I think it's not so much about like the fortune itself, and I think it's like what kind of like bold decisions in life that you want to kind of just like teach yourself a lot about, right? Because like, you know, there are certain things in life where we kind of like know that we are the ones having to take the path anyway, you know? It's like if you don't do it, no one else fucking will, you know? It's like you can't be a bystander forever. And I think that is actually such an Aries energy, like the refusal to be a bystander in a way, which can be aggressive, right? It's like the refusal to be a bystander. You know, bystander is a lot very Saturnian in a way, right? It's like, or even Jupiter is kind of just like Jupiter and Saturn for me. It is this planet that is more like it is the judge, or like it is like the sort of like it has to do with like the systems and the justice, etc. And I feel like something about Jupiter in Aries is like, yes, it's like very much the idea that you have to initiate the things you want to see the fruits in. So that seedling story of like making sure you are planting those seeds in a way, and having that bold and bravery, etc. To do so, because it's like the result is like not now yet. It's maybe you will see like moments where actually the results become instant, like for example, like my most recent magical story with my housing. It's just like, wow. However, I feel like the more you trust that sense of urge, it's also like, it's almost like, I feel like I'm partly like, there's also going to be a moment where Jupiter is going to meet Chiron in Aries. I also know that. And I feel like that's also part of like the wounding story that we're also healing. For me, it's like Chiron and Jupiter are both like the teacher. And actually, the best teacher that we need is actually our own inner child, or actually our own inner desire. The sort of like inner longing that we never got to honor because, obviously because a lot of things, right? You don't have money, you don't have time, you don't have people, you don't have mentors. Maybe part of it is because you don't have mentors. And I think, Jupiter and Saturn, like Jupiter is such an important planet because I do feel it is a planet that is actually related to role modeling. It's like, the Jupiter in life, because it's like, that's why it's like the guru, right? The guru is kind of like the role model, right? It's like something, quote unquote, the student want to emulate, or like, want to be. But however, it's like, but then once with the teacher sort of planet, the guru planet goes into Aries, it's like you are your own teacher, or perhaps no one can teach you about your past because you're the one who experienced it, right? You're the one who experienced your own childhood, your own burning sort of desire. Hence, the teacher that will actually heal it, quote unquote, or if you view it as a healing, or maybe remediate it, or kind of just like providing temperate, or like providing like the softness, or like the medicine, the cure, or whatever you want to call it, right? The solution, that would be you. So yeah.
Wow. Shahir, that is just such a transmission. I don't know, I'm so fucking in love with that. I kept hearing this phrase as you were speaking, that experience is your teacher. That I think for a lot of us, and this to me is a pretty universal experience actually, because, most people found themselves in various types of broken education system. Right? Whether we grew up in the United States or outside the United States, a lot of us really had to deal with educational systems that don't see us and that don't prioritize our unique ways of being in this world. And it's like, it's very, when I think about this, and especially in relation to what you were saying, like my heart really breaks because it reminds me of the ways that our inner child are almost like stomped out of us. I have a story that I want to share too, that feels very much like Jupiter and Aries based on what you were saying, which is that, yesterday I was in a ritual with a bunch of friends. And then I had this really vivid memory came back to me, Shahir, of myself. Maybe I was around age 3.5 to 4. It must have been around that because I skipped pre-K, and so I only did K1 and K2. And I really wanted to go to this one kindergarten that's right by where I lived as a child, that has this beautiful, gorgeous like playground. It was just so, I remember it as a child as like this completely mouth-watering playground.
Oh my God.
Like I was just so in love with that playground. And then my grandpa said no. My grandpa was like, no, you have to go to this, Christian school. Like, this is what's best for you. This is the best education. Essentially, I think, it was coming from a very well-meaning place. But now looking back, I could see that like a part of my inner child was still really angry because I just wanted to play, and like that understanding and that knowing of how important and how essential and integral play is to our human experience feels to me like, I don't know, like it's something that has been conditioned out of us or something like that. And I think that's part of why a lot of us are so like sad about not having the right teachers, because we kind of lost touch with this part of us that knows how to play, and through the act of playing and making mistakes, teach ourselves.
Yeah. No, agree. No, I feel that is part of the wonder, right? It's like I do feel that is definitely part of the wonder of Jupiter and Aries, or even Aries energy, in that sort of like allowing ourselves to fail in a way too. It's not necessarily like, I do feel like Aries can be a sore loser at times, right? It's however, they are also willing to admit about it, right? They're also willing to they will kind of like show their rage or whatever in that moment, because they do want to feel like that sense of like agency. And I think there's also something we can twist around that, right? Why do I feel that like a person with like a person with the Aries energy feel the need to win because they have exerted a force that is divine in a way, right? For me, it's like fire, or like the energy is something that is coming from divinity, right? If we go by the alchemy, like earth is like the ones closest to earth, like the spheres of like divinity, and fire is the one closest to like quote unquote the external sphere, right? And so fire is like the very much like the energy that is very much closest to divinity in that kind of like schema and system. Hence, I do feel like there is the entitlement, a sense of entitlement to win, and not necessarily like in a bad way, in a sense of like, it's actually in a very beautiful way, because if we twist that story, it's like why can't everyone win, right? It's like, why? Because I have honored something sacred here, which is, in Aries life, it might feel like it's their ego, or it might feel like they're blah 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 blah, quote unquote. You can put like a lot of like baggage or any sort of like moral judgment, any keywords there. But then at the end of the day, I think it is about like the honoring of the almost like the fire within self. Hence, it's almost like putting your life on the line. Hence, that's why there is a sense of like, I put myself in this, kind of just like a sense that might feel a bit like recoiled whenever it's not being accepted or rejected, etc. It's
Whoa, I love that. Yeah, that rings so true. And I'm surrounded by a lot of Aries teachers and friends, and even my partner is an Aries rising, and and I feel like, I really see that, and it's, you're so right. I think there's something about how, winning, really feels like a confirmation, right? That like the drive and the energy that you were riding was actually truly divine. And I think also, the ego gets such a bad reputation in a lot of spiritual discussions, I think, or like discussions within the spiritual circle. But I've been contextualizing the ego as a vehicle. It's like our spirits came into our bodies, right? And then you need to have a car. Like, okay, unless you're in New York, in which case you have the subway. So then we can say the ego is the subway. But, when we're in like California, for example, or even like in Malaysia, or in Jakarta, right? Like in Kuala Lumpur. Are you from Kuala Lumpur? Yeah. Like if you're in KL or if you're in Jakarta, like you can't go anywhere without driving. If you don't have a car, you're effed,
Yeah, truly.
Yeah. So I think, there's something that kind of shifted within me when I started really understanding that the ego really is kind of that vehicle, right? The ego is that which helps us get from one place to another. Like I think about my own exploration in the realm of music, you know, and how much of my ego has actually attached to that exploration. Like I feel when I was releasing my music and didn't get the responses I wanted, like I was really, I mean, you know, the wounded inner child, you know, the bratty part of me really came out. But I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Because as you mentioned, there is a part of that that is connected to that divine force.
Yeah, it is. It is very divine and beautiful in a way. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear if you have any thoughts around this. So halfway through this Jupiter in Aries transit, Saturn is going to be entering Pisces. And so Saturn is going to be answering to Jupiter, right? After having answered to itself, essentially, for the past since 2017, right? If I'm not mistaken. So I'm kind of curious to hear you talk a little bit about this. If you have any thoughts or anything you would like to share with people listening. And also, there was something that you wrote on your Substack that was just so beautiful. So there's definitely that too. I think, let me look at it actually. Let me find it. I was thinking about it.
I think the one that was talking about Jupiter and Saturn, right?
Jupiter and Saturn. Yeah. It's love postcard number 3, I think maybe.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. I can somehow recall that. Although I also have something else I feel I'll just say.
Just go with whichever one is coming through right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So
you're Gemini Moon. Saturn. I feel like your wisdom is just bathing us.
No. Oh my God, stop. I love I think Saturn and Pisces will definitely be very good in terms of a lot of like, you know, for me Saturn is also about the kind of like the work that you have to actually do, right? So if Jupiter has paved the way in some ways, Jupiter has been in Pisces, and I think there is something that Saturn moving through it. It's kind of like giving us a different lens of like the commitment to our spiritual life almost, right? It's either maybe it's like about finding like, you know, maybe the Saturn return sort of like harshness or closing has been a lot about you finding your community, etc. Finding people who are, you know, Saturn has a lot to do with like ancestors in a way, right? And so connecting Aquarian, connecting with like people which are true to your scholarship, true to your whatever you believe in. I do feel in Pisces is kind of just like a feeling in even more of like that expand, like that community growing or something like that, or actually you're doing like there's sort of like a real root work in there. And I was also like borrowing this language of like, you know, Saturn is like the solidification, and then Pisces like the dream, right? So it's like it's like something being solidified. I definitely feel it for sure. There's something that you are trying to solidify in Pisces, although it is not like the place of solidification necessarily. But then I do things that would be like containers, that's what Saturn do, right? So it kind of like contains the spaces. So I don't see it as necessarily is going to be restricting something with the spiritual. I do feel it's like it could even be about accessing a more inclusive sort of like spiritual framework, right?
Ooh.
Because sometimes I do feel Saturn in Aquarius can also like, you know, Saturn in a very silo way just likes to be in their own like rigid thinking. And so, you know, fixed Saturn is so rigid. And totally. I do felt that there were some parts of me. That's why I started writing. I was doing the Uranus work, I feel. I was just like trying to shift it out a bit because I was like kept on trying to do it the same way. And I was like, no, I don't think that's necessarily it, right? And so I do feel there is some sort of like a more porousness to the boundaries when Saturn is in Pisces. But then again, if you're trusting it, like you're actually balancing that with the Jupiter And like the Jupiter is almost like doing this opening work, right, with Saturn, to this different cycle, because they just had their conjunction in Aquarius, and so they are kind of just like going further and further apart. So I do feel like it's part of that.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I feel like Saturn in Pisces is an interesting, it's going to be a really interesting transit in general. And, you know, also like throughout Saturn being in Pisces, right? Jupiter is going to be traversing different realms. I think in 2023, it's really only going to be first Jupiter is going to be in Aries and then Jupiter is going to be in Taurus, right? I think that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, yeah, I was really feeling that Saturn in Pisces can provide a lot of necessary structures for, you know, the things that perhaps we've kind of been, you know, flying by the seat of our intuitive pants, right? Like the things that we've just kind of been vibing and we're like, oh, I think this is the right thing. You know, I'd be really interested to see, like, for example, with Saturn in Pisces, you know, something that I'm hoping, like crossing my fingers, is like maybe, you know, there will be new discoveries of like ancient spiritual texts, right? Or kind of like lost teachings that are being recovered, or like a rediscovery of some sort of, angelic or kind of etheric transmissions.
No, I think I feel that is already happening for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that is because Saturn is a planet that makes something real, especially something of the ancient, you know? And so, I'm actually, look forward to that. It's like new discoveries, and maybe it's like discovery by water, right? They found something in the ocean or something like that, right? It's like what? And so I love those sort of like things. But yeah, I do feel something major, definitely a breakthrough with regards to something ancient or something spiritual for sure. So that's very on the nose.
Yeah. Are there anything else you kind of feel like sharing with our listeners about faith, about Jupiter in Aries, about this coming year? Yeah, anything that's coming up at all, Shahir?
I think it's like, I do feel like, you know, I was coming back to my recent post of like, I was saying like with every hardship comes ease, you know? And the reason why I posted that, it was like ayat Quran, it was one of the surah in the Quran, and I was really living that I always recite that, like surely with every hardship comes ease, right? And I feel like, with the unshackling of Saturn in their domicile placement, I feel like that is the purpose of Jupiter. Like Jupiter is a liberated planet. And I was also thinking about, you know, it's like, of course, to build our dreams, we can't do it alone, right? But then it also needs to start from us. So I think that's like Jupiter in Aries, right? Jupiter rejoices in the 11th house because that's how dreams are made realized. It was through, obviously, through friends, and money can be through that, but it's actually through allyship of like true, sincere support of people. But then Jupiter being in Aries, it's like, so how is that? How am I going to support that dream that I want other people to support as well? And so I have to show them, you know, and it's also very Aries, right? Aries is such a like, all right, I'll show it to you. I'll prove it to you in a way, right? I'll give you the original prototype. So yes. Give them the OG.
I love that last piece about original prototype. Yeah, I think there's kind of this quality of, you know, sharpening or kind of maybe refining the rough diamond, right? That I think Aries is so attuned to. You know, I feel like one of the reasons why I understood, you know, my great love for my Aries teachers is because they understand, that potential is not the same as refinement. Like you don't have to be completely refined, and you can trust that when there's potential, like there's also the ability to kind of then refine, right? And like how passion is so important. So I really love what you're saying about that original prototype, because it feels to me like in my body, as you were saying that, it was more like an activation of the heart, like just kind of this moment of just like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do, without really having any context in the brain about like why or how, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I feel it. I feel that.
Yeah. Shahir, this has been amazing. You are amazing. You are so brilliant. I love having you.
Thank
I
you.
definitely have to have you over again. I just have a couple of questions for you before
Okay, go ahead.
we wrap up. So the first one is, I'm always offering this phrase, healing the spirit. That is the title of this podcast, to all of my guests. I'm curious to hear what's coming up for you. Any musings, any reflections, any images, visuals, or even like objections towards that?
Yeah. I was actually like going back to my like one of my major textbook. And because I think I wanted to like share this actually, and I feel like this is such a, how I love poetry, right? And so I'm actually gonna I feel, I'm gonna say about this poetry, and then it's by Rumi. So Rumi is like a beloved teacher of mine in terms of my path. Where is it? Yeah, so it's like Rumi reported saying, so the whole of my life summed up in 3 phrases. I was raw, then I was burned, now I am on fire. So I feel like that's also part of the healing the spirit. I feel like that felt so resonant, especially with the raw, and I feel like our spirit comes in very raw, right? And then along the way we are burnt, or like we are getting scarred, and now we're healing it. And so now I'm on fire. It's not like, so it's almost like that sense of like that phoenix rising sort of energy. And I always equate to my soul or my spirit to that. So every time I have, maybe it's also my own, I don't know, maybe it's some of my placement, I guess. Whenever I go through deep moments of shadow work or whatever work, and then I'm able to like emerge from it, that is like, I feel like the healing the spirit sort of moment, right? It's like wow, like this is like the deep end,
Yeah.
and there's the only way is or up, and so I feel that is like what fundamentally is like healing the spirit. And I think being comfortable with actually going down there is also part of it, which obviously our human self was like, no.
Yeah. Shahir, that is just so brilliant. Thank you. It's amazing. Where can people find your work? I know you do readings, you have Substack, but I'd love for you to kind of tell people how they can find your work and what are the different ways that people can work with you.
Yeah, so people can find my work online. I have my booking form linked at my profile. Usually you can click book now at my Instagram, Suprasensory Shahir, or go directly to my booking form is also fine. Right now I've been really loving doing my combo readings, to be honest. So I'm doing both, I'm using both astrology and tarot together. Mainly, like I will use astrology first, and then I will just like look at certain timing, and then I'll do tarot. And so those are kind of just like, people can come to me. There's a session called Spirit House. That's where all the spirit guide sessions are, whatever I talked about early in the reading, in our session. And then there's also tarot only. There's also astrology only if you're looking for like birthdays and stuff. But yeah, so I've been really loving offering the combo reading because somehow that's like, because I work with the planet, so sometimes I also like channel sort of like message from the planets themselves. So that's kind of like interesting. So yeah, I mean, I use Twitter for my inner monologues. I sometimes overshare on Twitter. So if people want to listen to my overshare, like I do feel I'm such a Gemini moon. It's like I sprinkle different information everywhere. So it's like
I see that. I really
and
see
so
that.
and so I have my I wouldn't say I have an Instagram persona, but I just having fun on Instagram. I love showing up to Instagram just because I see it as a teaching tool, like to just like be myself in some way, to just talk and engage with people. I actually do, like I spend time in my Insta DMs with people sometimes. So Twitter is just for my own entertainment, a monologue. Sorry, my Substack definitely is more. I feel it's more personal, and sometimes I would share things in my Substack that I wouldn't say, because like words have a way of saying things in silence, So I have my Substack for that. Or maybe sometimes if it's too serious, then usually some more like substantial stuff I want to talk about is always like in that form. And I also have a YouTube channel. I think that's important as well.
Yes.
That's Venus Embodiment series, which I started last year, which is actually going to continue. I'm doing a second round of it already. So I've already booked certain people. So check those out for a lot of Venusian fun and Venus discussion, talking to different astrologers about their Venus signs.
Yeah.
I love that. We just recorded yours.
I know. Oh my gosh, Shahir. I feel like you're such a great host, and you put me at such ease. And there were things that came out of my mouth that I was like, what the hell is this? Like, I didn't know I could say stuff like this. But yeah, so I think you are so incredible as a broadcaster, as a space holder. Yeah, and your voice is so essential.
Oh, thank you for validating that. And yeah, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shahir. This has been incredible. I cannot wait to have you back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that is it for my conversation with Shahir. I hope that you found something eye-opening, inspiring. I hope that by feeling into the archetype of Jupiter and Aries, that it's going to impact you in some way, right? I always say that astrology is not really about changing the course of your life or like shifting. Astrology is not really about doing, I think. Astrology is about having an awareness and seeing where that awareness takes you, right? So as always, working with any transit, my recommendation to you, my hope is that you take all of this transmission as a way to expand your reality, to deepen your relationship with reality, right? Rather than have it be something that maybe freak you out, And yeah, I think it really is so heart-opening for me to have conversations with someone like Shahir, whose work is so heart-led and heart-centered, and who shows up so authentically. And I am so excited to hear about what this episode brings up for you. So if you've been enjoying this episode, if you've been enjoying this podcast, I would love it. I would be super grateful, and my heart will just be so open if you could leave a review, or if you're on Apple Podcasts, leaving a review is probably the best way. But I understand that not all podcast platforms have that, so feel free to also leave a 5-star rating. And yeah, feel free to share this episode with anybody who you think may benefit from this transmission. As always, I am wishing you well. I hope that you take good care of yourselves. And until the next time we meet again, I am sending you so much love. Thank you so much.